All right, we're recording. Welcome everybody to this online Zoom meeting for Wilmington Rotary. Today is August the 11th, 2020. We're going to get started with the meeting this week with invocation and Pledge of Allegiance. Cleve, if you want to unmute us after he does the invocation, then we can do the pledge together, all right? Over to you, Bo.
All right, everybody, if you will, in whatever way you come together, we'll bow our heads and have our invocation together. We are so grateful again today to come together and be connected in this time of Rotary, service above self. In whatever way we come together bound together in spirit. We come together bound together in our fellowship of service above self. We also are coming together at a time after a week separated by a storm, but we come together in that storm knowing that we are with one another and bound in our service to take care of one another in all the things that are happening, in thinking about those that have contracted the virus, those that have been safe during this time. We pray for healing. We pray for the vulnerable, for those that are experiencing fear or anxiety. We bring prayers for peace and mind of spirit. We also are prayerful for those that are affected in any way in which we can bring our own abilities and our own ability to show up in all that we do in the areas of focus that we have with the resources and the abundance that's at our disposal. In all that, we give thanks, and we have that opportunity to today also bear witness to a great speaker that shares with us the good that we bring in our jurisprudence and all of that we have for our great state of North Carolina, and for all that we do to make sure that the good keeps moving forward for all of us. In all the holy names we pray. Amen.
Amen.
If you will, rise as you're able in heart and or spirit, face whatever flag you know to be had, and we will have our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, everybody is muted now. Robbie, if you would unmute yourself and resume the meeting, please.
All right. Going right from that, thanks a lot, Bo. Great job. Going from there over to health and happiness with Ann LaRue, someone who appears to me to be always happy. So Ann, take it away.
That's true. And in spite of all the hardships so many have suffered by so many people in the storms and the COVID, I'm doing just fine. I lost a lot of work, but nevertheless, first of all, and Bo, by the way, I don't think I would have recognized you with the beard if I passed you on the street. Look, you look very, very different. But first, I want to do a quick invitation reminder to any Rotarian that would like to join my team to participate in the Alzheimer's Walk on November 7. We're going to do this at Halliburton Park. You can contact me to get registered. As you know, our cart budget has suffered greatly. And I hope many of you will help this year. And if you don't want to walk, we gladly accept donations of any amount, such as Ellen Solomon did, or corporate sponsors. We can always use corporate sponsors. Birthdays. Jake shared on the 5th, which was last week. That was his 97th birthday. Jane Bernbach on the 6th. Bo Deans was on the 7th. And Elaine Leggett on the 9th. David Sims on the 12th, as is Eddie Biedenbach, and Bill Hummel on the 17th. Good news, John Murkison Reed Murkison's father is making a slow but steady recovery from COVID-19. He celebrated his 91st birthday on May 6th. He and my late husband have the same birth date, not the year, just the date. John holds badge number 1 with 64 years in our club. Our thoughts are with you, John. Laura and Cliff Pyron welcomed their second child, James Rhett, into the world on August 1. He was premature, but is doing great. He graduated from NICU. They rode out the hurricane in the hospital, and believe me, they cannot wait to go home. Percy Smith joined our club on August 6th in 1957 with 63 years in our club and holds badge number 2. Percy celebrated his 90th birthday in April. Congratulations. Dale Smith, he's recovered from a bout of pancreatitis, but all while getting over a battle with shingles. Oh, you deserve our prayers and thoughts. Good luck to you, Dale. Now, a bit of sad news. A friend of mine who recently shared, and he will remain anonymous, recently shared with me that he is now divorced from his wife of 46 years. I was shocked and asked what happened. He said, well, last week was my birthday and I didn't feel well getting up on that morning. I went downstairs for breakfast, hoping my wife would be pleasant and say, happy birthday, and possibly have a small present for me. As it turned out, she barely said good morning, let alone happy birthday. I thought, well, okay, that's marriage for you, but the kids will remember. My kids came bounding down the stairs to breakfast and didn't say a word. So when I left the office, I felt pretty low and a bit despondent. As I walked into my office, my secretary, Jane, said, good morning, boss. And by the way, happy birthday. It felt a little better that at least someone remembered my birthday. I worked until 1 o'clock when Jane knocked on my door and said, you know, it's such a beautiful day outside and it is your birthday. What do you say we go out to lunch, just you and me? I said, thanks, Jane. That's a great thing I've heard all day. Let's go. We went to lunch, but we didn't go where we normally would go. She chose instead a quiet bistro with a private table. We had a 2-martini lunch. Each of us enjoyed and enjoyed the meal tremendously. On the way back to the office, Jane said, you know, it's such a beautiful day. Why don't we go straight back to the office? Do we have to? I responded, I guess not. What did you have in mind? She said, well, let's drop by my apartment. It's just around the corner. So after arriving at her apartment, Jane said to me and turned to me and said, I'm going to step into the bedroom for just a moment. I'll be right back. Okay, I nervously replied. She went into the bedroom, and after a couple of minutes, she came out carrying a huge birthday cake, followed by my wife, my kids, and dozens of my friends and coworkers, all singing happy birthday. And I just sat there on the couch, buck naked. Thank you all. Have a good week. Be safe and well.
And thank you. Only you could get away with that in our club today. So thanks for the fun. All right, let's see. You've thrown my mind completely off. Next, we are going to talk about guests. I know I saw Terry again. Hey, Terry, unmute yourself and wave and say hello. I'm looking for you. I know you're up here somewhere. Oh.
Hello, everybody.
Oh, there she is.
Hi.
Hey, Terry.
Hi. Happy to be here.
Thanks for being with us again. All right, I'm going to pause for a second, and if anybody else has a guest that they would like to introduce, or if there's any club members from other clubs that are visiting today, please speak up. Say hello to the club and where you're from. I'm not seeing or hearing anybody else. I do want to say we do have 61 participants again on this Zoom meeting, and I really appreciate everybody showing up. We want to keep this club alive and thriving. And I know it's easy to skip a Zoom meeting, but it's nice. We've had 60 to 80 people. I figured we'd probably slow down and roll off a little bit, but y'all keep coming back, keep encouraging other members to come back and be with us on Zoom so that we can keep the club alive for when we get to come back together and meet in person again. So let's see, I'm going to move on from there. And we've got a few announcements. We'll make these quickly. So everybody that I'm going to call on several people. Todd, I've seen you on Zoom already. Can you give us a short report on the Williston Legacy Committee and the School Landscape Day?
I can. August 1st, the morning of August 1st was a great outing. We had like more than I feel comfortable naming here. Folks, Rotarians show up. We spread 10 yards of mulch, and then later we got 50 bales of pine straw, which was kind of an afterthought. Many of us had left. There were so many of us there that we made a lot of great progress in a short amount of time. But I want to give a nod to Prince Riley, Terry Smith, Dale Smith, Charlotte Davis, Hollis, Howard Loving, Bill Hummel, I think I was there, Elliot O'Neill possibly, David Grandy and his wife Becky. Principal Furr was great as a director and helping us pull that together. And I'm happy to say that the Hurricane Isaias did not squelch our efforts. Everything looks pretty nice over there, Everettsville. I did want to mention that Howard Loving mentioned that back about 15 years ago, under Al Height's expert direction, a lot of those bushes that we were mulching around were initially established. So, our legacy there continues, and thanks to everybody on the committee and everybody who participated in a great day.
Todd, that's awesome, man. Thanks for that quick report. It sounds like y'all had at least 10 people there representing from Rotary. How long were y'all there for?
Most everybody checked out before 11, but there were teachers and faculty there who stayed a little longer with the pine straw. Yeah.
Well, thanks again. All right, moving right along. And thanks for all of those Rotarians and spouses that participated. That's awesome. Good for the school. Good for us. Attraction books. Harley, quick report.
Okay. Am I live?
You are. I can hear you.
Fine. We try to sell 80 books every year. The history of that is that would raise $1,000 for the club, and we have historically given a Paul Harris, but it's within the discretion of the board. At this point, we have sold 47 books, so we're not there yet. But oddly, it's not off the time frame, but what's missing is the arm twisting that goes on at the club. So consider this a virtual arm twist. And I would urge people to consider getting them again, because they're good from today all of next year. They're good on to-go meals, if you're using meals. They're good on, I believe, they're usable on home delivery, certainly if you went to the store and then had it delivered. And they're also really good to give as gifts as tips to people you can. And we get one half, to see, for those who don't know, we charge $25 for the book. We pay $12.50 for the book. So 50% of the cost goes to the club. And we need it now. I'm putting an order in for the 40 odd that I have tonight. And then I will drive them around, delivering them to wherever you tell me to deliver them to. So if anybody wants to, please shoot me an email. Just tell me the names of the number of books you want, a delivery address, and your cell phone number, because I'll warn you I'm coming. That's it.
Harley, thanks a lot for doing that for the club. That's a neat fundraiser, and you've got your hands full delivering 40 of anything around town. So good luck with that. I hope you got plenty of free time.
Yeah, I do.
Good. All right. Thanks everybody. Try and buy a book if you haven't already. It's an easy thing to raise $12 for the club and you get the benefit of the book. So that's a great thing for us. All right. Rotary wheel improvements. Matt, are you here? And I didn't talk to you ahead of time about speaking. If you want to give us just a quick review about what's going on with the lighting out there.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're live.
Okay. All right. So basically what we did was at the rotary wheel, we had the excavation all around to set up, and the excavation was to set up all the lines for the light poles. And the light poles are on photocell and timer. So we've got a dual system in place. And we really need to do a shout out to Josh Johnson and his company, Modern Electric, because they donated that. They were a corporate sponsor. And that is in place as we speak. So we'll be positioned very well. But that was a major, since we already had the permits, we decided to proceed. And so those are all in place. And actually at night, they are lit up. So if you happen to go down to the rotary wheel, you will see the lights at night.
That's awesome. And they come on, are they on a sensor?
Yes, they're on sensor and a timer. So but the sensor will, so in other words, at dusk probably, they will turn on.
That's really cool. Thanks, Matt. That was a big project and I think a big accomplishment for our rotary wheel. I know the neighbors are excited to have it, or at least happy to have it. And thanks for that. Thanks for catching us up on where we stand there.
No problem.
All right, rotary mask. Bo, you already told us a little about this. Just for anybody who wasn't here when we first, just before the meeting started, give us one more review on that.
Okay, right now we've ordered 200 and we've sold 95 so far. If y'all would like me to put, I just sent Robbie in the minutes or the chat, the people that have ordered so far. If y'all would like me to verify your order, I can do that. You know, they're only $10 and the money that we're raising for this goes to COVID relief. I have put it on the Facebook site as well. Just all you have to do is email me with your address and how many masks you want, and we will send them to you directly to your house. Or if you would like to gift this to somebody or to somebody in another club, you can send me the address of who you want me to send it to. A couple people have done that, and I'm going to send them directly to the folks at the other clubs that they want them to. I am wearing the mask so you can see it. It's very comfortable. They have the little insert on the inside that you can actually slip something in so that it looks really nice. It says service above self right there, and then it's got the nice imprint on it, and they are absolutely comfortable. You can see my big old head. Obviously it fits just fine, so it's going to work for a man or a woman, and they're lovely. So just email me, and then Larry has volunteered and is doing a great job, is going to send you a email so that you can pay for them. So just, that's it. Thank you, sir.
So thanks for that report. And I did get that list that you sent me. And I just want to give a shout out to Noah.
No, right.
Woods. Noah Woods. It looks like maybe all of Capital Nissan, the whole shop will be wearing our rotary mask, maybe. I don't know. But he's got a plan with his big order, and we appreciate it, Noah. All right. Are there any other announcements for the benefit of the club? I'll wait just about 10 seconds. And if you have anything, please unmute yourself and let us hear about it. All right, hearing none. We're going to move into the best part of the meeting today, where Steve Coggins will introduce our speaker. Steve, take it away.
All right. President Robbie and fellow Rotarians from Wilmington downtown, it's my honor and pleasure to introduce to you my friend and fellow Rotarian from Raleigh, Justice Mark Davis of the North Carolina Supreme Court. He is married to Marcia, whose family is down here in Wilmington. Mark, I'm so glad that gives you a good reason to be coming down here more often. Heck, I think I get to see you now more than during our years in Raleigh. I have a particular affection for Mark because we both began our careers out of law school clerking for Judge Frank Dupree, the Chief Judge for the Eastern District of North Carolina, federal court here. But Mark practiced with Womble Carlisle for a good number of years and was Special Deputy Counsel to the Attorney General before he went on the North Carolina Court of Appeals in 2013 and was appointed to the North Carolina Supreme Court in 2019, and has since acquired an LLM in jurisprudence from Duke University. That's okay, Mark. I don't hold that against you. He really has a gift for the law in terms of applying it to people to understand. I had the pleasure of attending a presentation he did here in Wilmington not too long ago at a local synagogue, where he explained the roots of our American Anglo-based jurisprudence within Judaic tradition. It was really fascinating, and so glad that Mark that you can spend some time with us and illuminate us a little bit about what's going on in the judiciary.
Well, Steve, thank you so much. It is a delight to be with you all, and I hope you can all see and hear me okay. I wish I could be there in person. These are certainly such strange times. My wife, Marcia, does say hello. She's a proud Wilmington girl, and some of you may have known her family, the Schwartzes, who were active in the community for many years. So if you can see this book I'm holding up, it is called A Warren Court of Our Own. It's a book that I published last year about the court on which I now sit, the North Carolina Supreme Court. And it was a fascinating book for me to write that I really enjoyed doing the work to write it on, because this was such an interesting period for the Supreme Court. And I think it's of historical interest to anybody who cares about our judiciary or modern recent North Carolina history. As the name suggests, A Warren Court of Our Own. The title is sort of an analogy to the Warren Court from the U.S. Supreme Court, which some of you may be familiar with. It was a very transformative court in terms of greatly expanding civil liberties under Chief Justice Earl Warren in the 1950s and 60s. The premise of the book is that on a slightly smaller scale, this was North Carolina's version of the Warren Court. And it was populated by justices who were all luminaries in North Carolina legal circles. In addition to Jim Exum himself, there were 4 future Chief Justices, Burley Mitchell, Henry Fry, Beverly Lake Jr., and Sarah Parker, as well as very talented associate justices such as Lewis Meyer, Willis Wichard, and Harry Martin. And it was a joy to interview the surviving members of the court, along with about 65 lawyers, former law clerks, and court personnel. Excuse me, because I really wanted to get a balanced portrait of the court during that era. And former Chief Justice Jim Exum was kind enough to write a foreword for the book, which I think was very well done. In the time I have here, and I will be very respectful of time limits as a longtime Rotarian, I want to talk briefly about 2 topics that are discussed in much more detail in the book. The first is how the Exum Court came to be, and the second is why this court was so important. So how did the Exum Court come to be? I didn't really plan on writing about the history of partisan judicial elections in North Carolina, but as I delved into this book while I was writing it, I just got really interested in this topic, and I learned a lot that I really had not known before. As somebody who's lived in North Carolina his whole life but never been terribly political, I sort of had a general idea that the Democratic Party had controlled North Carolina's government for most of the 20th century, but I did not know how pervasive that control had been, particularly with regard to the judicial branch. As of 1986, when the Exum Court started, the last Republican on the Supreme Court had not been elected before 1896, if you can believe that. And that person was defeated in 1904. No Republican candidate had ever prevailed in a statewide judicial election in the 20th century in North Carolina. You essentially had a de facto appointive system where Democratic governors appointed Democratic justices who served as long as they wanted to until they approached the mandatory retirement age. So for most of the 20th century, Democrats controlled all 3 branches of government. Some of you have read about, or a few of you may recall, the so-called Southern strategy that the National Republican Party employed in the 1960s to try to bring more voters in the South to the GOP fold. 1972 was sort of a watershed year for Republicans in North Carolina, Richard Nixon carried the state easily. Jesse Helms won the first of his U.S. Senate terms, and a man named Jim Holshouser became the first Republican governor of North Carolina in many years. Now, in 1976, things sort of went back to normal with Jimmy Carter and Jim Hunt carrying the state. But then if you flash forward to 1984, things get really interesting. You had another popular Republican governor, Jim Martin, who was elected. You had another popular Republican president, Ronald Reagan, and you had Jesse Helms beating Governor Hunt in a very contested U.S. Senate race. But so far, none of the top ballot success had trickled down to judicial races. And I mentioned a minute ago that Jim Holshouser had been the first Republican to serve as governor for quite a while in 1972. During his one term, he did not have the opportunity to appoint any members of the Supreme Court, but Governor Martin, in a year into his first term in 1985, had a little more success. There was a retirement on the court, and he appointed a Republican woman named Rhoda Billings as an associate justice. She was a very well-regarded law professor at Wake Forest University Law School. But then in June of 1986, things got really interesting. I'm going to talk about a series of events over the next 2 minutes, and please keep in mind as I do so that all of these events occurred during the 5-month period between June of 1986 and North Carolina's regularly scheduled elections in November of 1986. In June of 1986, the longtime Chief Justice Joseph Branch unexpectedly announced his retirement. There was a longstanding tradition at that time in North Carolina that when there was a vacancy in the position of Chief Justice, the governor would fill the vacancy by appointing the senior associate justice, who was Jim Exum at that time, to the position of Chief Justice. But here you sort of had a wrinkle because you had the governor of one party, Jim Martin, a Republican, and you had the senior associate justice of another political party, Jim Exum, a Democrat. So Governor Martin was lobbied very strongly by members both inside and outside the North Carolina community and to follow the tradition, but he had a mind of his own, and it was important to him that North Carolina be a true two-party state at all levels of government. So he shocked everybody by elevating not Jim Exum, but Rhoda Billings to be the Chief Justice. During the course of writing the book, I got a chance to interview Governor Martin, which was a delight. And I asked him point blank during the interview, I said, Governor, why didn't you follow the state tradition and elevate Jim Exum? And he looked at me and smiled and said, Mark, that was not a North Carolina tradition. That was a Democratic Party tradition, which I thought was a pretty good answer. But in any event, Governor Martin did what he did. He appointed another Republican named Robert Browning to the court. And incidentally, to fill the Joseph Branch vacancy, he had appointed a Republican from Charlotte named Francis Parker. So now, all of a sudden, after all these years of complete Democratic control on the court, you now had a 4-3 Supreme Court with a Republican Chief Justice. And to make it even more interesting, of the Democratic incumbents on the court, 2 of them were already scheduled to appear on the ballot in November as part of their normal electoral process. So for the first time in anyone's memory, you had a partisan judicial race in North Carolina on the Supreme Court. You had several. And the focus was on the Chief Justice race, Jim Exum versus Rhoda Billings. And for the first time in North Carolina, we saw negative judicial campaigns run against a sitting judge because of votes they had cast as judges. You saw a grassroots group called the CCC, the Citizens for a Conservative Court, that was formed for the sole purpose of campaigning against Jim Exum on one single issue, which was the death penalty. Judge Exum was a very known opponent of the death penalty on moral and religious grounds, and as an associate justice for the last 11 years, he had often voted to overturn, in dissent, he had often voted to overturn death penalty convictions. So what this group, the CCC, would do is they would go around to counties in which prominent murder cases in North Carolina had arisen, in which defendants had been convicted, and Jim Exum had voted to overturn their death sentence. And they would argue that he was soft on crime and against the death penalty. This upset a lot of lawyers who were big supporters of Jim Exum, and they would hold counter demonstrations across the street. And they would try to tell people that Jim Exum was just doing his job. So, you know, in 2020, we sit here today in an era of super PACs and so-called dark money after Citizens United. And it all sounds very primitive, and maybe it was very primitive, but really this is all where it started. And, you know, for good or bad, and a lot of people think for bad, we've had a lot of negative ads in judicial campaigns ever since. So how did all this end in November after this whirlwind 5-month period of partisan elections for the first time in anyone's memory in the North Carolina Supreme Court? Well, it was very anticlimactic. The Democrats all won, as they always had, and once again, you had a 7-0 Democratic advantage on the Supreme Court, and the court with Jim Exum as Chief Justice began on November 26th of 1986. So let me just very, very briefly just talk next about why the court was important. Despite the fact that, as I've said, all the members of the court were of the same political party and they shared many of the same demographic characteristics, you would think that they would have been in agreement on basic principles of judicial philosophy. Well, they were not. Despite getting along really well off the bench, they had very different views on the proper role of judges in our government. And that's really the heart of the book. And that's really what interested me in writing this book. Jim Exum on the one hand and the Senior Associate Justice Lewis Meyer on the other hand were sort of the two intellectual centers of gravity on the court. They were each on opposing ends of the spectrum in cases involving individual rights. Like many judges today, I always hate it when the media tries to describe us as either liberal or conservative because those terms have acquired so much baggage, no one's really sure what they mean anymore. But for what it's worth, I think Jim Exum was sort of the classic example of the stereotypical liberal judge. He saw the law in idealistic terms, he was sympathetic to the underdog, and he was not averse to overruling prior decisions from the Supreme Court when he thought it was appropriate. Lewis Meyer, conversely, was the classic stereotype of the conservative judge. He was a strong believer in not overruling prior decisions of the court. He fervently believed that policy decisions were for the General Assembly and not for the judicial branch. Exum usually had a pretty reliable voting majority on the court, so Lewis Meyer was often in dissent, and he wrote a lot of very scathing dissents, many of which I quote from in the book, that accused the majority of being result-oriented or improperly making the law or legislating from the bench. In the book, I talk about 65 specific cases that I think were very important to North Carolina law during this era. And I'll just tell you quickly that they're divided up into subjects, including the North Carolina Constitution, criminal law, the death penalty, civil law, personal injury law, workers' compensation law, and employment law. As a general proposition, it's safe to say the Exum Court was more receptive than any era of the Supreme Court had been prior to that time in really given a close listen and a willingness to consider novel arguments from criminal defense attorneys as to why their client's conviction had been unlawful. And in civil cases, the Exum Court greatly expanded the remedies available to individuals who had been injured, who were suing the government or suing corporations, and giving greater protections to employees, both in employment-related lawsuits and with regard to workers' compensation benefits. The Exum Court ended at the end of 1994. Jim Exum was worn down by many things, particularly by the great number of death penalty cases that his court had had to decide. In what may have been poetic irony, Lewis Meyer also left the court at the same time, but he did not end it by choice. He was defeated in the Democratic primary in the 1994 elections and became a special Superior Court judge until his death in 1999. Jim Exum went back to Greensboro to practice law and to teach at Elon Law School. And let me just give you the postscript to partisan elections. 1994 turned out to be the breakthrough year for Republicans running for the Supreme Court. Beverly Lake Jr. and Bob Orr both won statewide elections to the court as Republicans. By 1999, Republicans had a majority on the court. Somewhat remarkably, by 2002, Sarah Parker was the only Democrat on the court. But North Carolina, of course, is the ultimate purple state. And by 2016, the Democrats had reclaimed a majority on the court. So I think it's safe to say that North Carolina is truly a two-party state, not only in the legislative and executive branches, but also in the judicial branches. Sorry to have spoken quickly, as I said. Being a longtime Rotarian, I know it is important for speakers to stay within time limits. But if there's any time left, I'd be delighted to try to answer any questions you might have about the book, about that era of the court, or about the court today. But thank you again for giving me the opportunity to come speak. And again, I wish it was in person.
Justice Davis, great to hear from you. Thanks for being here. From the notes over here in the chat, it looks like a surprising number of people had Rhoda Billings for a professor at Wake Forest in our club, which is really odd. But I'm going to turn it over to Cleve and let Cleve manage questions, if you don't mind, Cleve.
All right. Well, Justice Davis, we have a procedure here that we use because we cannot see all of our participants on one screen. We don't use the stick up your literal hand to do this. We are asking people to stick up their virtual hands. I'm sorry for the dinging in here. That is my messages. My daughter is exchanging information with my wife about the weight of our grandchild. And I can't seem to turn that off. But anyway, if you would like to make a question or make a comment, I would remind people that as Rotary, we are a nonpartisan organization. Justice Davis will be on the ballot in November, and his opponent will be given equal time in here. So I would like to ask that people not make political comments or speeches, but any other questions about Justice Davis or about the Supreme Court, the topic of his book or whatever, are fair game. And if you want to do that, please click on the participants screen. And in there, you will see a hand, an outline of a hand. And when you click on that, it says raise hand. And that will mean that you want to ask a question. Matt's iPad is going to be first, followed by Steve Coggins. So when I call on your name, please unmute your microphone. And let's go ahead, Matt, with your question or comment. Matt, please unmute yourself. There you go.
I did. My question to the Associate Justice is, do you think the justice system has become too politicized?
Matt, thank you for the question. I personally do. Judges really don't think of themselves as politicians. In fact, we sort of shudder when anyone tries to refer to us that way. Every state selects judges differently. In North Carolina, we're required to run for election and re-election. And so, I mean, in that sense, we are seeking political office, but we really, really don't think of ourselves as politicians. You know, we take an oath to follow the law and to do it fairly and impartially. And, you know, we all have political beliefs like anyone else, but judges have to check their political beliefs at the door. It is very, very important to us, not only that we decide cases without any sort of political bias, but also that the public understands that that's the way we operate. And unfortunately, we live in this is not exactly breaking news. We're living in a very, very politically polarized society. And a lot of these political disputes are spilling over into the courts. There's nothing we can do about it. Judges don't seek out cases. We have to wait till cases come to us, and then we're required to rule on them. But please understand how much judges don't want to be thought of as political or politicians. We all take that oath. We all put our hand on the Bible, and we all take it very seriously. So thank you for asking that question. Just a quick postscript to Rhoda Billings. As Steve said, I went to Chapel Hill, so I did not go to Wake Forest, but I have many friends who did, and they tell me that Rhoda Billings was an absolutely amazing teacher, but every single one of them was absolutely scared to death of her. She had a very fearsome image and did a great job of preparing her students for the real world.
All right, let's get to our next questions. We have Steve Coggins first, followed by Ben David. Steve, go ahead.
Well, my particular Rhoda Billings story is I think she doesn't get enough credit for also carrying the mantle of women on the North Carolina Supreme Court and being for a time, I think she was the first female Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme. No, that's right. Susie Sharp was before her, but she certainly was the first Republican one. And I'll never forget when she was asked point blank by someone that said to her, says, how do you feel about being a woman lawyer? To which she said, I have no objection to any label that is accurate. That summed up Rhoda, I think, pretty well. She kind of driving us right into the classroom all the way. Justice Davis, what I wanted to get some insight from you is, what do you see as the biggest difference in your experience on the Court of Appeals with the experience of being on the Supreme Court?
So I did serve for 6 years on the Court of Appeals, which is a wonderful experience. I greatly love serving on that court. The biggest difference is on the Court of Appeals, the number of appeals is greatly, much greater than on the Supreme Court. Each judge writes about 100 written decisions, or as we call them, opinions each year, and we write considerably less on the Supreme Court. Now, I can tell you in all honesty, I'm working as hard or harder on the Supreme Court than I did on the Court of Appeals, even though there are fewer cases. And the reason is, on the Court of Appeals, there are a lot of appeals where the issues are, sort of, people appeal because they can, not because they necessarily have a new and innovative issue of law. So there are a lot of cookie cutter issues on appeal that really do not take long to resolve. The Supreme Court is different. There's a reason every case that's here has gone to our highest court, because they all involve some new issue, some complex issue of North Carolina civil or criminal law, and they require resolution in a way that requires, frankly, a lot more heavy lifting, if you will, by the judges than most of the cases on the Supreme Court. So you end up working just as hard, but with fewer cases. But I think that's a good thing, because you're able to give each case the thought and attention and the research and the reading that it deserves. In the Court of Appeals, there are page limits on briefs that are 35 pages. There are no page limits on the Supreme Court. In some cases, it's not unusual to have literally, and I'm not exaggerating, 1,000 or more pages of briefing. And that's not even including the records that go with the briefing. And that's not a complaint. I love doing it. I'm just saying it's a fact. The cases here are larger, they're generally more important, and they're definitely more complex. So I think that's the biggest difference.
All right, thank you very much. And our next questioner is Ben David. I don't see any name after Ben. Okay, Mimi. We'll go to Ben and then to Mimi. Mimi, Ben, unmute your microphone and go right ahead.
Thank you, Cleveland. Justice Davis, thank you for joining us at lunch today and for your incredible contributions to our justice system. Like so many other people on this call, I had Rhoda Billings for 4 classes at Wake Forest, and she was also our moot court captain, so I had to go to New York City with her. And no one I've ever appeared before has ever scared me as much, or who I loved as much. So thank you for giving her a shout out. And Justice Meyer's son, Adam, was a classmate, and he now lives here in Wilmington. So we have quite the Wake Forest posse here.
I did not know that.
This club and beyond.
By the way, before you go any further, I would like to thank you for your public service. Ben has been a friend of mine for a number of years, and I've always been a great admirer of his. So thank you for what you do in a very, very difficult job.
Thank you. If we had a full program, we could talk about our work even before you joined the Supreme Court, but thank you for all that you've done.
Thank you.
I do want to ask, because I have a lunch set up tomorrow with about 10 students from UNCW who have been interning with us all summer. And they're, of course, going back to school like everyone else. And they always ask me and some of the senior prosecutors in this office whether they should go to law school and become lawyers one day. And I've been having these lunches now for 20 years. I'm curious as to what you would say to them. If you had a 21-year-old sitting in front of you right now who says, I could go to business school, I could go to med school, I could do something else, would you advise a senior in college right now to go to law school and become a lawyer, or would you advise them to do something else?
That's a great question. And I do have kids about that age that I do have similar conversations with. Well, I think it depends. I really do think that, it's important to love your job. I love my job as much as anyone can, and I know you do too. But there are a lot of unhappy lawyers in the world, and that's something that really saddens me. I would try to talk to the person and make sure they genuinely have an interest and try to explain to them in what the practice of law really involves. But if they are interested, then yes, I would absolutely recommend that they go to law school. I've never known, and I don't know about you, but I've never known anybody who had a law degree and regretted it, whether they practice law or not. As the lawyers on the call know, law school teaches you to think in a certain way. It obviously, teaches you a great deal substantively about our legal system, but it also teaches you how to think in a way that applies not just to legal issues, but to non-legal issues as well. And I think that process is really invaluable. And, you know, a lot of people with the degree don't practice law, and they find meaningful things that are important to them that they're happy with. But, you know, within the practice of law, you know, as all of you know, there's so many things you can do. You know, when I was in law school, it was sort of maybe expected that everybody would go to a law firm. That was sort of the traditional path. And now I don't think it's that way at all. I think everyone understands, including law schools, that there are so many alternative career paths in public service as well as the private sector, in addition to traditional law firms. So I don't think there's ever been a time where there have been more options open to law school graduates. So if anyone has an interest, knowing with eyes wide open what the practice of law is like, I would definitely encourage them to attend law school. A lot of different ways to answer that question, but that's my answer.
All right. Thank you, Justice Davis. Our next question, so far it's the last question, comes from Mimi. Mimi, please, I see your mic is unmuted, so go ahead.
Thank you for being with us today. My question is, what is the most significant and impactful decision you've been involved with on the Supreme Court so far?
Well, thank you, Mimi, for the question. Goodness, I'm so used to putting people to sleep. It's always just an absolute joy when people ask me questions after one of these talks. So I've been on this court for 1.5 years, and as you know, as I said, all the cases are important. Let's see. We've had some very important cases in criminal law. There's one that you know, probably got a lot of publicity. It involves the Racial Justice Act, which some of you may have followed. It was a law passed in about 2008, which, without getting into the weeds, provided that inmates on death row could have their lives commuted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole if they could show the existence of discrimination in North Carolina in the imposition of the death penalty at the time that they were convicted. And a subsequent legislature came in a few years later and basically repealed the Racial Justice Act. And legally, the interesting issue was a number of people on death row had filed claims under this statute between the time it was in effect and between the time the legislature had repealed it. So the issue was brought to our court as to whether or not it was constitutional. And I'm sorry if this is getting a little wonky, but the issue was whether it was constitutional for the Second General Assembly to repeal it in a way that kept those prisoners who had filed claims under it from continuing with those claims. It was a fascinating case legally because there really was not much else like it to draw from. Usually when we get a case, we follow precedents that our court has decided in the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years on similar issues. But on this case, we actually had to go back to an 1866 statute, a post-Civil War statute in which after the Civil War, the North Carolina legislature had passed an amnesty statute for killings that had occurred during the Civil War, and then a later incarnation of the North Carolina General Assembly had repealed that amnesty. And there was a particular defendant who had been a soldier in the war who made a similar argument to what the defendants were making here under the Racial Justice Act, namely that it was unconstitutional under the ex post facto law, for those of you who are familiar with that, for the second legislature to undo what the first one had done after they had asserted claims. And we reached all the way back to this 1866 law and said that it was not constitutional for the legislature to do what it did with regard to these prisoners. So legally, it was a fascinating case. You know, obviously we're talking about people on death row, so it was a hugely important case. Many, many, many hours of work on this one. Literally thousands of pages of briefs and briefs from friend of the court. This was the most difficult case that I've had since I became a judge. So thank you for asking about that.
Okay, it's almost 20 after, and we are going to need to end
Can I just ask Mark a question?
Anne Lou, please. Go ahead with your question quickly, please.
Thank you. It's not a question. Would you hold the book up again because I missed the title and I would like to see that.
Thank you so much. I love talking about this book, but I'm terrible at the marketing part, as you can tell.
That's okay. Just hold it up so I can get the title.
It's called A Warren Court of Our Own.
Thank you.
By Carolina Academic Press. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all I needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Looks like we have one remaining question from Paul Lawler. Paul, please, you're unmuted, so go ahead.
Yeah, real softball here. We hear a lot about people in the court who don't have adequate representation. Is there a role, an appropriate role for judges or justices to help when a defendant has a lawyer who just really isn't up to snuff? Or is that something you have to avoid?
Well, so we do get, it's not unusual for us to get what's called an ineffective assistance of counsel claim, where somebody who is convicted of a crime files a separate motion saying that their lawyer, the representation they received was just so bad that it was as if they didn't receive any representation at all. And those are arguments that we take very seriously, because a big part of our justice system is premised on the notion that everyone is entitled to adequate legal representation. Doesn't mean everyone is entitled to the best lawyer, in the world, but you are entitled to adequate legal representation. And so there are times when, based on the facts of a particular case, where our court says, yes, you have proven that the job you're looking at, it's rare, obviously, but there are times when we agree with that argument and say, yes, your lawyer was, the representation they provided you was constitutionally inadequate, and we remand for a new trial. The claim is common. It's rare that we grant that relief, but in appropriate cases we do, because it is so important that people have adequate representation. And just quickly, let me say, in civil cases, our appellate courts have started a program in the last 2 years in which we will appoint pro bono lawyers to serve as counsel in family law cases, because we're seeing a lot of family law appeals that have real serious appellate issues, but the litigants just are unable to afford to hire private counsel. And so in appropriate cases, we will order that a pro bono lawyer is appointed to represent them. So that's a great program that is working very well. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it back over to Robbie Collins here at 122.
All right. Justice Davis, thanks again for being here. Everybody enjoyed it. Glad that you got to field those questions. If you have a minute after 1:30 and anybody has any additional questions, you can certainly stick around for a few minutes if you're available. Thank you. Ben, I think I was your first intern when you moved to Wilmington, and I really hope better for the other 10 people that you meet with tomorrow. So good luck influencing them.
Hey, you're the reason we still have the program, Robbie. I'm so proud of you.
I'm surprised the program lasted after that summer, but thanks anyway. All right, let's go to the four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. Again, everybody, thanks for being here. Cleve, if you'll unmute everybody. You can all scroll up to the top of the chat if you want to be prepared. And when you unmute everybody, Cleve, get ready. Here it comes. The four-way test. Are we unmuted?
Yes, sir.
All right, all right. The four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. Number one, Harley.
Fear to all concerned.
Nope.
Oh. Number one.
Number one, is it the truth? I like it. Man, you're mixing it up, Harley. Thanks. Number two, Ellen.
Is it fair to all concerned?
That's right. Number three, Rob.
We'll build goodwill and better friendships.
Exactly right. And number four, Albert. Beneficial.
Would be beneficial to all concerned.
That's right, Rotary.
Rotary.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks a lot for being here. If you want to stick around for a minute and talk to Justice Davis, he said he nodded in affirmative that he would be available. Cleve, thanks for running the meeting. Great time. Everybody, will see you next week if we don't see you on Zoom before then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great week. See ya.
We still have quite a few people here, and I can't really see everybody on one screen. Maybe so. Does anybody have a question for the justice?
Yep.
Albert, go ahead.
What, you're elected, are you elected for 4 years or eight-year term, and where are you in your term of service?
Sorry.
Did you hear me?
We are elected.
Can't hear you.
Justice, I'm sorry. You were muted for part of that. Go ahead right now. You're okay.
Okay, sorry about that. Still grappling with Zoom like all of us. We are elected for 8-year terms, and I personally was appointed by the governor in March of 2019. So under North Carolina's election laws, I have to run to keep my seat this coming November.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Anybody else with a question? All right. Well, once again, Justice Davis, thank you so much for being here. We do appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much. It's truly been a delight.
Right.
I'm easy to find, so if you want to talk anymore, just give me a call.
We will. Thank you.
Thank you again.
All right. Hearing no questions, I'm going to end this meeting in just a second. Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Thank you.
And thanks to Larry for being my co-host.
Thank you, Clay.